minor gripe with my Elvira that I haven't been able to sort out yet. It deals with this monster slide ramp, and in particular, this roll under switch that the ball hits as it enters the ramp. As the ball rolls up or down this ramp, it moves this wire gate and actuates this microswitch here, like this. You can see there's a lot of travel in the gate here, but there's not a lot of travel on this actuator. And that makes it pretty hard to adjust. You can control like the inclination of the microswitch. You can bend the actuator. You can maybe bend the wireform. But it has to be just right so that when the ball rolls through, it's enough to actuate this microswitch. You can hear, maybe you can hear, as I'm messing with it, how the microswitch clicks sometimes, like that. And then other times, doesn't click. I haven't been able to adjust this so that it's reliable and repeatable. So oftentimes this switch doesn't work, and I don't get the ramp entry sound effects or the ramp entry flashers that you would normally get on Elvira. Even worse, sometimes during gameplay, the ball will roll up the ramp and get hung up in the gate or the gate cover and ricochet right back down the slide again. So I don't score the ramp at all. Happily, there's a solution that fixes both problems. It's called the MRS, or magnetic reed switch. An MRS replaces a mechanical switch in a pinball machine with a contactless switch that operates off of magnetism. There's lots of different variations of MRSs. This one is designed for ramp switches. It sits on the side or underneath a ramp and activates when a ball crosses over it or next to it. The MRS replaces the entire assembly. The microswitch, the gate cover, and the wireform gate. Before we install it, we can get an idea of how it works by installing it in parallel with the existing switch. So let's go ahead and do that. The MRS has two leads. You can see one is green, one is white. It wires up the same way as the existing switch does. So I'm going to connect my black clip to the white wire of the MRS because that's the white lead going to the microswitch, and my red clip to the green one, which corresponds with the green wire of the microswitch. We'll turn the machine on and put it in switch test mode and see how it works. Alright, so you can see when we move the wireform, the switch fires. And you can also see the problem that I have with my machine is that it fired once, but it's not firing again because, oh, there it goes, because this switch is not activated or not adjusted very well. And I just can't get it adjusted right. So let's get it to the point where it would fire. And now you'll see if I run the ball over the MRS, it'll activate right away. So the MRS would be installed on either the side or underneath the ramp so that the ball rolls next to it. In this case, I've got some metal ramp protectors on either side of the ramp, so I'm going to need to install it underneath the ramp, right about here, so that the ball rolls over it. Let's get an idea of how that'll work. So the MRS will go on the bottom side of the ramp like this, in the case of the Monster Slide ramp, and also the Party Punch ramp, which has the same kind of roll under switch. The switch will be covered up by a decal, so you won't be able to see it like you can here. When the ball rolls over the switch, you can hear the switch test goes off. It's really fast, it's really accurate, it doesn't require any adjustment, and it'll totally get rid of the whole wireform and gate cover to solve the ricochet problems. And it'll make the ramps look a lot better. Let's get it installed. To get access to the underside of the ramp, I'm going to remove the barbecue targets. In hindsight, I wish I had just removed the ramp instead of trying to remove the stand-up targets. I was trying to save work by removing those barbecue targets and just slipping the MRS underneath the ramp, but I forgot how much trouble it is to remove those stand-up targets. It would have been easier to remove the ramp. And really, I had to pull the screws out of the base of the ramp to scoot it over just to get the stand-up targets up and away from the ramp. So I didn't save myself any work by removing the stand-up targets. It would have been easier just to pull the whole ramp. That is a pain in the butt to get out. Alright, so now we need to clean the underside of the ramp, and the MRS has a self-adhesive strip that you just adhere to the bottom of the ramp, and then we will be able to remove this whole mechanism. Since this is riveted to the ramp, I'll probably leave the mounting plate for the microswitch, but I'll take the microswitch off and remove its wiring. And then we'll run the wiring from the MRS down through the same hole that these wires go down through. Before I adhere anything, I want to do a test fit, because the ramp where I want the switch is much wider than the MRS. It's important that the switch be kind of low on the ramp, because when you activate the switch on the way up, there's a certain sound effect, and if it doesn't make it all the way up the ramp and it rolls back down, there's a different sound effect. So I don't want it too high, because then I'll never hear that second sound effect. Ideally, I want it almost as low as possible. But the ramp is so wide that I can't cover the entire surface with the MRS. So I want to see how far down the ramp I can put it where the ball still triggers the ramp well, or the ball still triggers the switch well. Actually, that works really well. So that will be right on the arrow right here. Left side of the ramp works, right side of the ramp works, of course the middle works. That's pretty good. Now if I moved it down more to closer to where the switch is, I don't get activation. At the edge of the switch. I only get it in the middle. So I think where I'm going to need it is right about at the bottom of the arrow on the slide decal here. Which is just slightly behind where the original switch was, or where it will have been after I remove it. Alright, so right about there. I'm going to clean up the bottom of the ramp a little bit and pull off this adhesive strip here, and then I'll just stick it underneath the ramp. After wiping off the bottom of the ramp, I test fitted the cable length of the MRS to make sure it could reach to the existing connector underneath the playfield. I probably should have done that before I bought the MRS, because the MRS folks can make those cables as long as you need them to be, if you just tell them the length that you want. But it turned out the length they sent was long enough for me. Alright, so I pulled this through. Let's pull the pins out of this connector so we can slip this through the hole in the ramp and remove this whole assembly, and then we'll reuse this connector housing on the MRS so we can connect it to the mating connector under the playfield. On Elvira, ramp switches like this are terminated in 0.062 inch Molex connectors. When I ordered the MRS, they offered to use that kind of connector to terminate the wires. I really wish I had taken them up on that. It would have saved me some trouble. I didn't realize that the ramp switches in this game used connectors like that. So take a look at your particular installation and see if you need a particular connector, and maybe the MRS guys can terminate the MRS for you. Jeez, that one was a pain. Alright, now we can remove the roll under switch. I'll need to put those screws and the bolt back on, because even though I don't have that switch there anymore, these screws are used to hold on my ramp protectors. So I gotta put them back in. I can take the microswitch off. There we go. I don't want to have to drill out these rivets, and if I ever have to put the microswitch back on, I don't want to have to rivet on the ramp again, so I'm going to leave this mounting plate there, but we can get rid of the wireform gate and the gate cover and the microswitch. Now we need to put 0.062 male pins on the MRS so that we can reuse the connector that mates underneath the playfield. I could have saved myself some trouble if I had let MRS terminate this switch for me with a .062 Molex connector, but it's not hard to pull the old connector off and reuse it as long as you've got a pin extractor. There we go. We can just feed that through the old hole. Alright, so we're going to mount it right there. So it'd actually be easier to do with some light. This is where I really wish that I had pulled the ramp off instead of trying to slip the MRS underneath it. I had already test fitted it to see where I needed to place the MRS so that it would respond well to the ball, but it was more difficult than I thought to try to place it when that adhesive strip was exposed, because I was afraid I was going to lightly touch it on the bottom of the ramp and have it stick and then rip the decal off when I tried to move it around a bit so it was in the right spot. So I felt like I had just one chance to get it right, and unfortunately I put it a bit diagonal and a bit off center, so the MRS doesn't respond well when the ball is rolling up the right side of the ramp. Totally my fault. If I had to do it over again, I would pull the ramp off and make sure that MRS is centered and spans the entire width of the ramp, because then it works great. Alright, so we're all buttoned up with the glass back on. I really like how clean this looks now, without that gate. I've still got the gate on that ramp. I don't know, you can just kind of see the wireform there. I'll replace that one next. Alright, now that's all buttoned up, let's give it a shot. There's a few things you have to watch out for when installing MRS. Before you order MRS, save yourself some effort and take a look at the existing switch that you're replacing. Measure how long your wires need to be, and see if the existing switch is terminated with a .062 inch Molex. If so, the kind folks at MRS can terminate the MRS for you, so it's totally plug and play. Be careful where you mount the MRS. It doesn't need to be in the same place as the old switch. In fact, it might be better for it to be located somewhere else, typically a bit further up the ramp. When installing under a ramp, the MRS needs to cross the entire width of the ramp, so no matter if the ball rolls up the left side or the right side or the center, the switch will be sure to register it. That means the MRS needs to be placed on a narrower part of the ramp, where it can reach all the way across the ramp. Make sure you test fit the switch first and find the best place for it. If the ball hops off the surface of the ramp and doesn't keep smooth contact with the ramp surface, the MRS might not register. To avoid that problem, it's better for the MRS to be further up the ramp, where the ball has settled into its path. But in the case of Elvira, I had to put the MRS lower down in order to get the right sound effect when the ball doesn't make it all the way up the ramp and rolls back down. Aside from figuring out the best switch placement, the installation is completely plug and play. It just replaces your old switch, plugs in right where the old switch did, and sticks right under the underside of the ramp. If you've got problems with ramp gate switch adjustment or ricochets, then I highly recommend MRS. The switch registers so much more reliably than the original gate switch did. It's completely solved the ricochet problem that I had with my old switch, and the ramp looks really clean without the gate. It's a really cool product.
Ooh, nice organ. organ.